This podcast was produced thanks to the support of York University and the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies, thanks to the Dean's Award for Research Excellence or DARE program. Special thanks also to the CSIW team, which contributed to the necessary research and debate that constituted the pre-production process of this piece. In particular, thanks to the project supervisor Dr. Annie Bunting and to the project assistant Bruno Véras. The aim of this podcast is to bring you an interview with members of NGOs in West Africa and to understand the issues and necessities of their beneficiaries and themselves during COVID-19. This particular interview was conducted with the assistance of Bruno Véras, while the interviewee, Amelia M. Cooper, was assisted by the NGO's research consultant, Tinatwa Calvin Colley. Thank you for listening. First of all, I wanted to thank you, Amelia, for joining us today and for being available to answer all these questions, and thus giving us access to your immense knowledge and expertise. Since we don't know each other, I think it's better to begin with some introductions. I'm Lorenzo Serravalle, an undergraduate student at York University, and I am also a member of the CSIW team, Conjugal Slavery in War. I'm here in the role of researcher as I am undertaking a research project under Professor Annie Bunting. We're studying the impacts that COVID-19 had and still has onto women, girls, and NGOs, but from your perspective. For this reason, we are having this discussion where I'm going to ask you some questions that, this is important, they are designed on top of a careful process of review of both academic and non-academic literature. So these are research-based questions that we are going to discuss about, and you're going to give me your opinions and your reflections on this matter. And all of this will be edited, will be curated, will be analyzed, and will become a podcast which people can listen to. This is all that comes up to my mind in terms of introduction, so please introduce yourself now.
So my name is Amelia M. Cooper, and I am the Executive Director of Aiding Disadvantaged Women and Girls at ADWANGA. And this organization was funded by Amelia in 2005 to work with women and girls. We work under 5 thematic areas: educational support to adolescent girls, economic empowerment, access to justice, adult literacy, and reproductive health.
Again, thank you, Amelia, for being here, and thank you for giving us your availability to answer these questions. I think that we can start. The first question is a bit more general, but it also helps to kind of give us a little bit of context in which we can work out our discussion and our reflections. The question is, did COVID-19 restrict the activity of your organization? But also, what impact did it have on your beneficiaries?
Local women groups that are outside of the capital, we work in rural areas. So COVID made it difficult for us to move around. For instance, the government restricted citizens moving from one county to another. So the impact was kind of negative.
Obviously with the pandemic, it's been over a year that we had COVID, which significantly affected Awanga. In terms of our beneficiaries, they had their own challenge because we were unable to do follow-up activities, because these activities are key in terms of rolling out our different programs. But then with the restrictions, you can move. Beneficiaries cannot get, for example, trainings. They cannot get basic services like some of the legal services that are being provided for
Survivors.
Yeah, survivors. So those are all key challenges associated with the COVID. So there was a huge impact on Awanga's activities as a result of COVID.
I understand. As a matter of fact, research has shown that COVID-19 impacted negatively the large majority of NGOs in West Africa, especially in terms of funding. Which brings us to our next question. So, what were the financial impacts of COVID-19? And more in particular, how was funding affected? And also, was staff financially stressed?
Okay, so the financial impact, we had to scale the staff down because there were no funding. And of course, the staff wouldn't be happy when you sit them down because there were no funding. And we could not get funding because donors were all, putting us on hold, and there were no income coming. And for us, we are donors driven. So without donor funding, it made it impossible for us to do anything concrete.
So, and a classic example is some of the research activities we had to carry out, some of the uh, interventions with survivors that we had laid out in our program. Unfortunately, as a result of the COVID, those activities could not be carried out because number one, the staff uh, that should be carrying out some of these activities, we had to scale down. So we have limited number of staff because you can keep everybody and keep the payroll running for everybody because of COVID. Movements were restricted. Mind you, our movement or our activities is focused mainly in the rural areas. So that alone is a was a challenge. Additionally, uh, our follow-up activities require operational funds. So to keep the vehicles moving, to be able to follow up with survivors, to do some of the programs, awareness and everything. Cost associated with that, we're constrained because, again, most of the organizations that would have loved to fund our activities had to themselves scale down, either remove their staff, repatriate their staff back to their countries, and then everybody was just on hold, waiting to see how far this would go. So it's been over a year now. So and those impacts are still there. Uh, the financial aspect of it also caused a challenge in the expectation in terms of holding on to the programs. So people who were benefiting from the program, how long can you keep them waiting? That has been a challenge as well as a result of the impact. So yes, financially, uh, there was a huge impact on Awanga's operations.
I think that this reflects what previous research has found, as I already said, and thank you for sharing your perspective. I have another question now, which is equally important. Since was funding affected negatively, and as you say, there were many financial issues being a donor-based institution, I wanted to ask if there was any new mode of collaboration that was born between NGOs, but also between communities, as a response to the restriction and financial issues.
All right. So yeah, with regards to the challenge and whether we're able to forge some form of collaboration, yes. Uh, One way the government encouraged citizens, organizations, and the like in the fight was to see if we can all together contribute one way or the other, either through our technical capacity on the incident management team. So, given our experience in the field, Awanga collaborated with few organizations, but again, there were limited number of international organizations present on the ground. But we collaborated with other local organizations and a few international organizations to do uh, awareness, to distribute uh, basic preventive materials, and then uh, some basic food supply. Very, very limited, given the challenge at the time. Uh, But most of the collaboration was more in the form of technical exchanges, wherein our experience in the field in terms of community entry, so that served as an advantage to work with some of the other organizations in terms of how they roll out some few COVID-related activities in the field. Again, all of these were done under stringent conditions, given the restrictions, observance of health protocols, and other restrictions put in place by the government to curb the spread of the virus.
Okay, so in addition to collaborating with organizations, there were, for example, there was one international organization that even provided food. You know, they provided funding, and that funding we had to get food and COVID materials to send out to our beneficiaries in rural area, because the beneficiary had some high expectation from us as their
First responders.
as first responders, and because we didn't have the funding, we contacted some international organization that came to our aid and provided funding. In terms, we sent out food and COVID related materials.
I see. You mentioned forms of collaboration in regards to technical help, and I couldn't help but to think of social media and the communication technologies, which ties in with another question that is fundamental in discussing COVID and its impacts, I believe. And that is, what role did social media play in managing the pandemic for you? In particular, were social media helpful to keep some form of contact with your beneficiaries when you couldn't reach them physically, or was it used in damaging ways by others? What are your opinions?
Uh, the social media play both negative and positive role, especially in urban communities, because people in urban community got internet facilities, they have the smartphones and whatnot. So the positive thing was they were reporting, some people were reporting about, you know, the positive side of vaccine and what to do to prevent COVID. The negative side was others were saying the vaccine will kill, the vaccine will add to your problem. So that was the negative side. But in the rural areas, there were not much people accessing social media, because first thing, there are no internet facilities, no network. Some places telephone cannot even reach there, or you don't get signal and whatnot. So the social media did some good and some bad. You want to add to it, Kevin?
Yeah, so um, the social media in Liberia, unlike other places, you found more people with smartphones in the urban areas as compared to the rural areas. So social media had both negative and positive
Impact.
impact. The negative side is that for COVID, especially when it came to understanding the reality of the existence of COVID, that was an issue because there were too many conspiracy theories on the social media, and many people tend to follow that and then not take which undermine the fight against the virus because people did not want to abide by some of the regulations, some of the preventive measures. On the other side, it played a positive role in the sense that for those who were level-headed, were able to get some positive information from social media, and by that they were able to follow some of the measures. In the rural areas, uh, there was a challenge in that you don't have some of the places you don't easily have access to uh, uh, smartphones. So there were electricity issues, so people cannot charge their phones easily. So they will not want to spend much time on social media. as opposed to urban communities. So they just rely on the local community radio and other awareness programs to be able to follow through. Uh, they didn't really have that luxury of time and the resources to keep on social media. Again, mind you, most of the folks in rural areas are not as educated as those in urban areas, so they will not be able to follow through well on social media. So that's just our own take on how social media, what role it play in the fight. So it can be viewed from two perspectives, but then we look at the different settings, urban versus rural. Yeah, so in terms of contact, yes, people use Facebook a lot, especially Facebook. WhatsApp is not as popular as Facebook. Many people are more familiar with Facebook. But then you also, in the urban areas, you have people now migrating to WhatsApp, Instagram, and other things. Yeah, so they play a role in terms of keeping the connection because once there's no movement, so if they play a good role in terms of keeping people connected,
and
keeping
inform.
people informed about happenings around birthdays, uh, events that call for celebration. Because again, COVID had its own fear. All right. So the social media was a point of consolation. So people get so frightened. So maybe if you get online, you can be able to talk to your friend, encourage your friend, see some of the positive things happening around, and then cheer up, and then regain yourself, and you get re-energized to go the next day. So in the urban areas, yes. Rural areas, not much because in terms of access to telephone, access to electricity, education, and other things, those are all challenges that affect the rural areas. Yeah, but on a general scale, it plays a lot of role in terms of keeping families, friends, loved ones connected.
Okay, so let me just add the nice question you said, were they used by other people in a negative way? I would say yes.
Yeah.
For instance, one time there was a doctor on,
Mhm.
and he was saying in 2 years, all the people that took the vaccine would die.
Yeah.
And people really got afraid. And yeah, so there was a negative way the social media had an impact.
Mm-hmm. So, leaving aside conspiracy theories, social media played a positive role in terms of spreading information to prevent the virus. But at the same time, and this is what I've understood from your response, at the same time, um, being that rural beneficiaries cannot, for the most part, access internet connection, they were kind of left out from this dynamic of mobilization of information. And this ties in with your experience, ADWANGA's experience, and use of social media during the pandemic. How did you use it? Did you not use it at all? In what other ways were you able to connect with your beneficiaries? Especially being that you couldn't physically reach them.
The people in rural areas that we are getting our messages to do not have smartphones, they do not have access to electricity, and some places you cannot even use the regular telephone. So no, we could not use WhatsApp, neither social media during the pandemic due to the communities that we work in. Let me add to that. So your next question would be, so what did you use? We use the radio community. We have local radio communities that we get messages across. So the radio, we tell the radio what to say, and the radio will onward, announce to the beneficiaries in the rural areas.
I see. Thank you for sharing this with us. Internet connectivity is certainly an important factor in considering the context-depending impacts of COVID-19. Reflecting a little bit more on this same topic, was connectivity the only difference between impacts in urban and rural areas?
So when it comes to rural versus urban, we need to understand the mode of transmission of the virus as well as some of the other uh, properties associated with the way in which the virus is spread. So for rural areas, their lifestyle, the social behaviors also had a way of influencing the rate at which people got infected. So rural areas, there are smaller farming groups, so families. So just upon hearing the 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 number of cases in Monrovia, which is the epicenter, people in the villages retreated to the farms. So people decided to move to the villages, move on the farms by almost like locking themselves in from any contact with the outside world. So that kind of helped lower the rates of infection in rural areas. Unlike urban areas, uh, the social economic conditions in urban areas, for example, people got to go to markets, and is this open market, the flea market, what we call here. Uh, so obviously there will be one way or the other, some movement or the other. So that alone kind of contributed to the increase in the number of cases. But for rural areas, they are basically farmer or farming communities. So many of them just decide to stay on the farms, and their own little measures put in place in terms of restricting strangers from entering the villages. So that helped to reduce or lower the rates in rural. But again, all of these things are just our own perception. We need to go in there and do a more detailed assessment and see exactly, okay, some of these assumptions or some of the general perception we're having, what difference are they having? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Still thinking about different impacts, did you notice any difference in the experience of the pandemic, but for men and for women?
In terms of understanding the rate of or the level of impact uh, between men and women, I think we need to look at the figures from the incident management in terms of over the period, okay, from March 2020 up to present. We can start to check around and source the information and see. From March up to present, the difference in terms of infection rate among women and men, and then by that we can be able to determine and say, okay, we have whether we have more men affected or more women affected, and that can be able. Then we can use that and correlate it with activities that women are involved with and activities that men are involved with. Then we can safely say or kind of describe the impact. But as we speak, we may not be able to give cogent information on that.
Yeah, the current context is definitely a dynamic one, and things can change very quickly. But at the same time, there is this level of lived experience of the pandemic that is crucial for the understanding of the impacts of COVID-19. If I have to think about an example, one example can be the role of the church in managing the pandemic. And I wanted to know what are your reflection on this? What are your reflection on the role of the church?
Well, the churches themselves were confused because nobody understood what the virus was all about initially. But then later on, churches started encouraging their parishioners to look out or abide by the health protocols and giving them some assurance, praying, and because people were really afraid. So the church's role were like giving us hope that the Lord was in control and that we should depend on God no matter what. God was the only person that we depended on. So people do a lot of praying and asking God's intervention. So material wise, the churches themselves needed things. So some churches had enough to share, others didn't have. So We're all dependent on God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think we have time for one last question, which is also the most personal, I believe, in terms of your perspective. I wanted to know whether you are optimistic about the future of the pandemic or not. And also, what are your hopes, but also your necessities, both from the perspective of ADWANGA and from the perspective of your beneficiaries?
So, of course, I am optimistic about the future, and Awanga wants to continue to play that meaningful role she has been playing, improving the lives of women and girls. And now that we are happy that the vaccines are all available, and once the rollout is done, we as Awanga will just we it gives us hope and the opportunity to just redirect, maybe not redirect our program as to how we used to do it, redefine our programs, and know how to work with the women and girls. But we are hopeful that things will get better, and we are hopeful that we will have more. We hope to go into more communities after this pandemic and to continue our services to women and girls that we've been working with.
Thank you, Amelia. Thank you for sharing with us all of your opinions and your reflections. This is all very valuable information and will all be curated, analyzed, and be part of the podcast series with another interview from an NGO institution in Sierra Leone. Thank you again, and bye bye.